Hey guys, tonight we're setting out on a journey that begins not with swords drawn, but with a whisper that would set half of Europe on fire. You're standing in a chilly November crowd, somewhere in France. The year is 1095. A man in flowing robes stands before thousands. Pope Urban II, his voice rising over the murmurs. He's calling for something unheard of, a holy war. You're told it's for God, for salvation, for the rescue of Jerusalem from infidels. But even as you listen, there's a flicker in the crowd's eyes that isn't just faith, it's hunger, greed, and desperation. And if we're being honest, you probably wouldn't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from, and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The words, Deus vult, God wills it, echo across the square like thunder. Men fall to their knees, some weeping, some laughing, all pledging themselves to the holy cause. It's easy to think this moment was born purely of faith, but historians still argue whether Urban's call was spiritual or political. Europe was crawling with restless nights, younger sons with no inheritance, mercenaries with no wars to fight. A crusade offered them adventure, redemption, and let's be real, loot. You watch as peasants clutch crude wooden crosses, eyes burning with zeal. The knights, in polished armor, kneel to have red cloth crosses stitched onto their cloaks. Somewhere nearby, a merchant counts the coins he'll make selling supplies to this army of God. The air is thick with incense, sweat, and something else, anticipation, maybe madness. The quirky thing is, this idea of marching thousands of miles to fight in the name of faith wasn't entirely new. Earlier pilgrimages had taken place for centuries, peaceful ones. People traveled to Jerusalem to pray, not to kill. But this time, Urban added the promise of something special, full forgiveness of sins. Eternal salvation, in exchange for a sword. Talk about a marketing campaign. You can almost feel the ripple of change spreading through medieval Europe. In taverns and churches, rumors fly, of heavenly visions, of lands flowing with milk and honey. One legend even claims that the very stars in the sky rearranged themselves into the shape of a cross the night of Urban's speech. Probably not true, but imagine looking up, seeing that, and thinking, yep, time to grab my sword. The peasants, poor and barefoot, begin their preparations first. They sell what little they own, gathering scraps for the road. For them, it's not just about salvation, it's escape. From famine, from feudal lords, from lives so bleak that even a holy war sounds like hope. The church fuels it all, songs, sermons, banners, until it feels like the very wind is chanting Jerusalem. As you move through this sea of faces, you notice contradictions everywhere. There's piety in one pair of eyes, greed in the next. For every knight who dreams of saving souls, another dreams of gold. For every monk praying for peace, another prays for victory. And somehow, all of them think God is on their side. A scholar centuries later would call this the psychological explosion of medieval Europe. That first spark of the Crusades wasn't just about land, it was about identity. About proving whose version of God would rule the world. And as the crowd begins to disperse, you feel it. A tremor in the earth, not from the ground, but from hearts beating in unison. The age of Crusades has begun. And you, dear traveler, have just taken your first step into centuries of faith, fire, and contradiction. The roads of Europe are alive with motion now. A strange, clumsy procession of believers and opportunists heading eastward. You trudge among them, your boots sinking into the mud, the smell of sweat, animals, and unwashed faith heavy in the air. The first wave isn't made of knights in shining armor but of peasants, farmers, and dreamers who call themselves God's poor. They're led by preachers like Peter the Hermit, a wiry, wild-eyed man with a donkey and a voice that could set a tavern on fire. You listen as Peter shouts about miracles on the road, how rivers will part for them, how angels will feed them. But reality hits fast. Supplies run out, children cry from hunger, and local villagers, tired of feeding the endless tide of pilgrims, begin to lock their doors. The march of the faithful turns into a march of thieves. You see a strange irony in their journey, a holy mission powered by stolen bread. Historians still argue whether this so-called People's Crusade was ever really part of the Pope's plan or just a chaotic eruption of religious fever. Whatever the case, it's both tragic and darkly comic, thousands walking toward the horizon, believing they're heading straight to heaven, not realizing they're marching toward disaster. You pass a man with blistered feet carving a cross into his chest with a dull knife. Another sells bits of holy soil that's really just mud. A few nobles shake their heads in disbelief at this mob that calls itself an army. But even they can't deny it, something powerful is moving through the world, something no king or priest can fully control. By the time you reach the outskirts of Hungary, the landscape has turned harsh and foreign. The locals don't greet you as saviors, they see you as invaders. Skirmishes erupt, confusion reigns, and suddenly, the first holy expedition is burning villages filled with Christians, not Muslims. You can almost hear the irony laughing through history's corridors. Then comes the true army of the Crusade, the knights, nobles, and disciplined soldiers of Europe's high-born families. Unlike the ragged pilgrims before them, these men ride in with banners snapping and armor gleaming in the sunlight. Among them is a man you'll hear much about, Godfrey of Bouillon, a duke with both piety and political calculation in his eyes. He's not here just to save souls, he's here to carve a kingdom. Quirky fact, many of these knights had to mortgage their estates just to join the crusade. Some even sold ancestral lands for a ticket to heaven, a medieval version of quit your job, chase your dream, but with more blood and chainmail. Their families would struggle for generations to recover what was lost to this spiritual investment. You find yourself walking beside a blacksmith hammering dents out of a helmet, muttering prayers between strikes. The rhythm is hypnotic. Metal against metal, faith against reason. Somewhere behind you, a priest blesses the road with holy water. In front, soldiers sing a grim hymn about dying in God's name. The air smells of dust and determination. The march stretches for miles. Thousands moving east, crossing rivers, climbing hills, sleeping under strange stars. They tell stories by campfire, of monsters in the east, of rivers that run with gold, of angels who'll protect them. And yet, under that same firelight, others whisper the truth, that half of them won't make it, that food is running low, that the road ahead leads not to paradise, but to pain. By the time you reach Constantinople, the great Byzantine capital, the army is weary but awestruck. The city rises like a jewel, golden domes, marble walls, and shimmering mosaics glinting in the sun. Emperor Alexios I watches their arrival with uneasy eyes. He had asked for help, not an invasion. The Crusaders see him as both ally and obstacle. You can almost sense the tension, two worlds meeting, one ancient and cultured, the other raw and restless. For now, though, the march continues. Ahead lies Anatolia, deserts, sieges, starvation, and glory. Behind, the echo of church bells fades into memory. And somewhere in between you, just one weary traveler, begin to wonder if this holy war is really about faith, or just another excuse for mankind to chase what it can't understand. You wake to the shrill cry of horns cutting through dawn mist. The army has reached the walls of Antioch. The year is 1097, and you can feel the weight of exhaustion in your bones. 4 months, you've marched across Anatolia under a pitiless sun, your lips cracked, your armor hot enough to fry an egg. Men have fallen behind, horses have collapsed, and yet still the army pushes forward, lured by the promise of salvation and the shimmering prize of the holy city beyond. Antioch is no ordinary fortress. Its walls tower higher than anything you've seen, studded with towers and guarded by Turkish soldiers who know every stone, every shadow. The Crusaders encircle the city like ants around a beehive, building makeshift camps from splintered wagons and tattered cloth. The stench of rot and sweat lingers in the wind. It's the smell of a siege that's going to last far longer than anyone expected. You wander among the tents, hearing whispers of doubt. God has abandoned us, some mutter. Others clutch relics, a splinter of the true cross, a saint's bone, anything to hold faith together. Historians still argue whether the siege of Antioch was more about endurance or sheer luck. What's certain is that it turned the crusade into something darker, something more desperate. The food runs out first. You see knights fighting over scraps of horse meat, priests blessing dead mules before they're roasted over weak fires. One soldier swears he saw comrades eating leather belts boiled in dirty water. The nights grow colder, filled with fevered prayers and the constant dread of enemy arrows whistling through the dark. And then, a bizarre, almost unbelievable detail from chroniclers. Some crusaders claim to have found nourishment by gnawing on grass. Others, historians grimly note, may have gone further. There's a tale, probably exaggerated, of a starving soldier digging up a grave for supplies. Whether myth or not, the siege stripped away whatever holiness this war once had. Yet even in the pit of despair, fanatic hope glimmers. You hear rumors of visions, a shining knight seen riding along the ramparts, angels hovering over the battlefield. Maybe it's exhaustion, maybe hallucination, but it keeps the camp from breaking apart. Then one night, betrayal changes everything. A secret message passes through the lines. A local guard, disillusioned with his leaders, offers to open a gate. You feel the tension crackle in the air as chosen knights slip through the darkness, clutching swords and whispered prayers. The gate creaks open, and chaos bursts forth. Inside the city, it's madness, steel on steel, torches lighting the sky like a second dawn. You follow as crusaders storm through narrow streets, shouting Deus Vult, while terrified civilians flee into the shadows. The once mighty Antioch falls in a frenzy of smoke and blood. And just when you think it's over, the gates of hell open again. A Turkish relief army arrives to take it all back. Trapped inside the walls they just conquered, the crusaders face starvation once more. The irony stings, victors turned prisoners overnight. But then, something strange happens. A monk named Peter Bartholomew claims he's had a vision of St. Andrew, revealing the location of the Holy Lance, the spear that pierced Christ's side. You watch as the crowd gathers, half believing, half skeptical. They dig in the church floor, and unbelievably, they find a lance head. Quirky as it sounds, that rusty piece of metal revives the crusade spirit. Soldiers weep, priests chant, and the starving army surges out to meet the enemy once more. Against all odds, they win. Antioch is theirs. But you can't shake the feeling that the miracle was too convenient. Historians still debate whether the lance was divine sign or clever trick. Maybe both. What's undeniable is that it turned a doomed army into a legend. As the sun sets behind the bloodied walls, you walk through the city, hearing the muffled cries of the defeated and the exhausted hymns of the victors. The crusaders have survived, barely. But looking at their hollow eyes, you realize they've lost something far greater, innocence. And the road to Jerusalem still stretches far ahead, waiting like a mirage on the horizon. You finally glimpse it, Jerusalem. After years of marching, starving, and dying, the holy city glimmers in the morning light like a promise half-remembered from a dream. It's June 1099, and the crusaders, lean and sunburnt, stand before its golden walls. Some weep openly, others fall to their knees. You feel a rush of awe and dread. This is the moment they've all imagined since that first sermon back in France. But as history tends to remind us, reality rarely matches faith's fantasies. The city's defenders, the Fatimid Egyptians, have prepared well. Their banners ripple over stone battlements, and every gate bristles with archers. The crusaders are few now, barely half of what began the journey. Their armor is dented, their clothes ragged, their spirits stretched thin. They camp outside the walls, staring at the place they've come to reclaim, not knowing how much blood the holy part will cost. Food runs low almost instantly. The land around Jerusalem is dry and unforgiving, the wells poisoned or sealed. You can hear children crying in the night, and priests whispering that God is testing them once more. One chronicler claims that soldiers drank horse blood to survive. Another swears that vultures followed the army like faithful dogs. Historians still argue whether these stories are true or exaggerated, but either way, the line between devotion and delirium has blurred beyond recognition. One night, you wake to the sound of chanting. The crusaders, barefoot and weeping, are marching around the city's walls in solemn procession, priests leading them in hymns under the stars. The moon glows faintly on their faces, hollow-eyed, sunburnt, yet strangely serene. It feels like madness and faith have fused into one. They believe, utterly, that God will break these walls for them. But in truth, it takes wood, sweat, and engineering. The Crusaders, desperate, build siege towers from whatever they can find: olive trees, broken wagons, even door frames stolen from abandoned villages. They smear animal fat on the towers to keep them from burning under enemy fire. It's a bizarre image, warriors of Christ, improvising like carpenters in the desert. At last, the attack begins. Arrows darken the sky, catapults roar, and the ground trembles under the thunder of battle. You climb a tower as it creaks and lurches forward, the smell of smoke stinging your lungs. Men scream prayers and curses alike. Then, a crash, a cheer, the walls are breached. You see a knight raise his sword high, and the wave floods in. Jerusalem falls. What follows isn't holy. You walk through the streets, and the silence is broken only by the clash of steel and the cries of the dying. Chroniclers describe it in gruesome poetry: blood in the gutters, corpses piled by the temple, soldiers slipping as they run. It's said that the conquerors rode, knee-deep in blood. Whether that's literal or exaggerated, you'll never know. But one thing's certain: victory and horror arrive hand in hand. You stop near the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, where the Crusaders lay down their weapons and fall to their knees. The air is heavy with incense and death. Priests chant hymns of thanksgiving, while outside, the city still burns. You can almost hear history itself sigh: faith fulfilled, humanity betrayed. And yet, amid the ruin, a strange calm settles. Godfrey of Bouillon refuses to be called king, choosing instead the title advocate of the Holy Sepulchre. He claims he won't wear a crown where Christ wore thorns. It sounds noble, maybe it even is, but the irony doesn't escape you. The city has been taken in Christ's name by the sword. Quirky fact: some soldiers believed they saw angels on the ramparts during the assault, fighting alongside them. Others claimed the heat and exhaustion made them hallucinate. Either way, Jerusalem became not just a prize, but a symbol, the proof that faith could conquer the impossible, and that men would kill for a dream they barely understood. As night falls, the fires die down, and the city that once shimmered with promise lies in ashes. You walk through the empty streets, the stones still warm beneath your feet. The air hums with something eerie, not triumph, not guilt, just exhaustion. You realize the crusade has found its heart and lost its soul. Jerusalem belongs to the Crusaders now, or so they believe. You walk through the newly conquered streets weeks later, the air thick with the smell of smoke and sanctity. Crosses rise above every dome, church bells echo where the call to prayer once did. But beneath this pious surface lies a new hunger, not just for heaven, but for land, titles, and gold. The victors carve up their prize like feast meat. Godfrey of Bouillon rules as defender of the Holy Sepulchre, though everyone knows he's more king than guardian. His brother Baldwin soon takes power and crowns himself outright. Around them, new Crusader states bloom in the desert: the Kingdom of Jerusalem, the County of Edessa, the Principality of Antioch, and the County of Tripoli. It's as if Europe has transplanted its feudal roots into foreign soil. You ride along the ramparts of these new, holy kingdoms, marveling at how quickly the war of faith has become a game of thrones. Castles rise across the Levant, towering fortresses like Croc de Chevaliers and Belvoir, gleaming under the relentless sun. Monks become warriors. Monks with swords become landlords. The Templars and Hospitallers emerge, brotherhoods sworn to protect pilgrims, yet soon richer than most kings. Historians still argue whether these Crusader states were acts of faith or acts of empire. Maybe they were both. To the settlers, it's paradise won by divine right. To the locals, it's occupation disguised as holiness. Arabic chroniclers write of the Franks: strange, pale men who bathe rarely, eat noisily, and pray loudly. Yet even they can't deny their skill at building, fighting, and, oddly, adapting. Quirky detail: some Crusaders, realizing they'd never return home, began marrying local women, adopting Middle Eastern customs, even wearing light robes instead of heavy European armor. These Franks of the East spoke Arabic, minted their own coins, and lived halfway between two worlds. One chronicler joked that they'd become half Christian, half Saracen, though perhaps that's just proof that survival often outpaces dogma. Still, for every act of coexistence, there's tension simmering beneath the sand. Trade routes shift, alliances twist, and rivalries bloom between Crusader lords themselves. You watch as Baldwin of Edessa feuds with Bohemond of Antioch over territory. The church tries to keep the peace, but greed has its own gospel. And yet, life goes on. Pilgrims pour in from Europe, trudging dusty miles to kiss the stones of Jerusalem. Merchants follow, from Venice, Pisa, and Genoa, turning ports like Acre into glittering bazaars. Spices, silk, relics, and rumors change hands faster than gold. You smell cinnamon on the air and hear 6 languages in a single street. For a moment, the Holy Land feels almost cosmopolitan, a strange meeting of Crusader knights, Greek monks, Arab scholars, and Jewish traders. But peace in these new kingdoms is fragile, like a candle in desert wind. Beyond the walls, Muslim leaders begin to rally. Word spreads eastward that the infidels have desecrated Islam's sacred city. The call for jihad rises in response, not as fanaticism, but as balance. For every Deus Vult, Allahu Akbar, answers across the dunes. You spend one evening on a hill overlooking Jerusalem, the city glowing like molten gold under the setting sun. The muezzin's call drifts faintly from the distance. Somewhere, a remnant of faith untouched by conquest. You realize this land has seen gods come and go, yet it endures. By now, many Crusaders have grown complacent. They build gardens, hold feasts, and argue over who owns which tower. The holy fire that once drove them now flickers like a dying ember. You can almost hear the sands shifting beneath their castles. Historians will later write that this was the calm before the storm, the moment when the West thought it had triumphed, unaware that the East was preparing to strike back. And far beyond the desert horizon, a name is whispered for the first time. A warrior who will one day humble these kingdoms and turn faith's tide once more. But for now, under the stars of the Levant, the Crusaders sleep in their stone citadels, dreaming of eternal glory and ignoring the quiet rumble of destiny drawing near. The desert wind carries a new sound now, not the clatter of Crusader armor, but the disciplined rhythm of an army reborn under the crescent banner. You stand on the ramparts of Jerusalem, watching the horizon shimmer with heat and change. Whispers spread through the Crusader ranks. A new leader has risen in the east. His name is Salah ad-Din Yusuf ibn Ayyub. The world will remember him as Saladin. Unlike the squabbling lords of the Latin kingdom, Saladin unites where others divide. He gathers the fractured Muslim world under one purpose, not revenge, but restoration. You can almost feel his presence in the stories told around campfires. A man both warrior and scholar, known as much for mercy as for might. Historians still argue whether his greatness lies more in strategy or in spirit. Either way, he becomes the storm the Crusaders never saw coming. From Damascus to Cairo, his banners rise, green, gold, and resolute. You travel alongside his growing army, through deserts that seem to breathe fire. The discipline is astonishing. Soldiers fast before battle, pray in perfect lines, then ride out with silence more terrifying than any war cry. Gone is the chaotic fervor of the First Crusade. This is methodical, righteous war. Meanwhile, within the Crusader states, things begin to rot from the inside. The kings grow indulgent, their alliances fray, and greed replaces faith. Baldwin IV, the young king of Jerusalem, rules with tragic dignity, his body ravaged by leprosy. You see him riding through the streets, his face hidden behind a silver mask, a ghost of chivalry holding together a kingdom that's already crumbling. Quirky but true, despite his illness, Baldwin remains a brilliant commander. He even defeats Saladin once, at the Battle of Montcassard, when he's barely 16. Chroniclers say he fought with one hand trembling from disease and the other clutching the relic of the true cross. For a brief moment, it feels like divine favor has returned to the Crusaders. But victories like that are sandcastles, beautiful, fleeting. When Baldwin dies, so does unity. The kingdom falls into infighting, ambitious nobles, reckless adventurers, and scheming courtiers. One name stands out among them, Reynold of Chatillon, a man so ruthless that even his allies call him dangerous. He raids caravans, breaks truces, and provokes Saladin beyond patience. And patience, for Saladin, runs deep, until it doesn't. In 1187, at the plains near Hattin, destiny finally calls. You stand amid tens of thousands of crusaders, the sun like a hammer overhead. They've marched too far without water, lured into a trap by Saladin's masterful tactics. Smoke from burning grass fills the air, choking men and horses alike. The true cross, the holiest relic in Christendom, gleams atop a hill, and then vanishes in the chaos. You can barely breathe as the battle collapses. The Crusaders' lines crumble, their banners fall one by one. The sound of steel fades into groans and dust. When the smoke clears, the army of Jerusalem is gone. Saladin's forces move like a tide, swallowing everything in their path. The Holy Land, once carved by Crusader ambition, is reclaimed piece by piece. And yet, when Jerusalem finally surrenders to Saladin, the world witnesses something unexpected: mercy. There's no slaughter this time, no rivers of blood. The citizens are ransomed instead of killed. The Christian holy sites are preserved. Even some crusaders admit, grudgingly, that the Muslim conqueror behaves more like a Christian knight than many of their own. Historians still debate whether this was strategy or compassion. You suspect it was both. Saladin understood something deeper, that legacy is built not on terror, but on restraint. You walk through the quiet streets of Jerusalem, hearing distant prayers in Arabic mingling with church bells. The city feels balanced, as if the land itself is exhaling after a century of madness. For a moment, there's peace, fragile, flickering but real. Far away in Europe, though, the news of Jerusalem's fall spreads like wildfire. Kings and peasants alike react with horror and fury. The cry goes up again, Deus vult. The Third Crusade is born, and soon, another storm will rise from the west, carrying one of history's most famous kings across the sea to meet the man of the East. The age of Saladin has begun. And the Holy War, for all its weariness, is far from over. The sea wind is sharp and cold as you stand on the deck of a massive ship bound for the east. The banners above you snap in the air, lions, crosses, and crowned sigils. The Third Crusade has begun, and leading it is a man whose name will echo beside Saladin's forever, Richard the Lionheart. England's warrior king, tall, golden-haired, and as fearless as he is prideful. If Saladin is the moon, calm, wise, and deliberate, Richard is the sun, blazing and unpredictable. You watch the fleet glide across the Mediterranean, hundreds of ships gleaming like scales of a great serpent. The journey feels less like a pilgrimage and more like destiny reloading itself. Historians still argue whether this crusade was about reclaiming faith or just reclaiming lost pride after Jerusalem's fall. Either way, both Richard and Saladin know what's at stake: glory, reputation, and control of a holy prize neither man truly owns. When Richard lands at Acre, he finds a long siege already choking the city. The Crusaders, exhausted and fractious, have spent years trying to capture it from Saladin's garrison. Richard wastes no time. He throws himself into the battle, commanding catapults, leading charges, even taking an arrow wound and laughing it off. Chroniclers adore him, soldiers idolize him. Yet beneath that brilliance, there's a ruthless edge. When Acre finally falls, Richard orders the execution of nearly 3,000 prisoners. The massacre stains his legend like smoke on silk, undeniable, unforgettable. And yet, here's the strange part. Despite all this brutality, a mutual respect begins to bloom between the two leaders. Messages are exchanged, gifts even. When Richard falls ill with fever, Saladin sends him fresh fruit and snow from the mountains to cool his drink. The chroniclers can hardly believe it, the Christian king and the Muslim sultan, treating each other like rivals in a game of honor rather than enemies in a holy war. Quirky historical note: neither man ever meets face to face. Their diplomacy happens through envoys and letters, each trying to outdo the other in courtesy and cunning. You imagine it, two chess masters on opposite sides of the board, both aware that only one can win, yet admiring the other's play. You follow Richard's march southward along the coast, a glittering, grueling procession under a merciless sun. The Battle of Arsuf looms, one of those moments where history slows to a single heartbeat. Saladin's cavalry strikes again and again, swirling like desert wind, but Richard holds firm. Then, at the perfect moment, he gives the signal. The Crusader line surges forward, breaking Saladin's attack in a thunder of hooves and steel. Victory, but not conquest. Jerusalem lies just beyond the horizon, visible from certain hills, close enough that the soldiers claim they can smell the dust of its stones. Yet Richard hesitates. The city is too well defended, the Crusaders too weary, and even Richard knows that taking it might mean losing everything else. He kneels one night, gazing toward the unseen city, and whispers a prayer historians still debate. Was it for faith or forgiveness? In the end, the two titans do what few warriors ever manage. They make peace. The Treaty of Ramla in 1192 ends the Third Crusade. The Christians keep control of the coast, pilgrims may visit Jerusalem safely, and Saladin keeps the city itself. No grand victory, no final defeat, just a rare, fragile balance in a world drunk on zeal. You picture the moment when the news spreads, knights lowering their swords, priests crossing themselves, merchants already calculating profit in the new peace. Richard sails home soon after, exhausted, perhaps wiser. Captured on his way back, he spends years in captivity. A king held hostage, a crusader without a crown. Saladin, too, won't live long to enjoy his triumph. When he dies in 1193, his treasury is almost empty. He's given away his wealth in charity. A simple shroud covers him. No jewels, no gold. Historians still argue who truly won, the lion or the crescent. But as you stand on the same shore where their ships once passed, the waves whisper a softer truth. Maybe, just maybe, they both did. Not by conquering cities, but by proving that even in war, respect can outlive hatred. The holy war pauses, but it doesn't end. The sands remember every step. And somewhere in that stillness between faith and fatigue, you realize, peace, like holiness, is always temporary. You wake to the scent of dust and despair. The era of the Fourth Crusade has begun, and it's a mess from the very first step. If the Third Crusade felt like destiny clashing with honor, this one feels more like a business deal gone wrong. You stand among soldiers not marching toward Jerusalem, but bargaining with Venetian merchants on the Adriatic coast. Picture it, 1202. Venice, gleaming in the sun, a city of canals, gold, and cunning. The Crusaders have chartered Venetian ships to carry them to the Holy Land, but they've run out of money. The Doge of Venice, old and half-blind but sharper than any sword, offers a solution. Help Venice capture a rival city, Zara, and he'll clear part of their debt. You can almost hear the collective hesitation ripple through the camp. Fight, fellow Christians? That wasn't in the brochure. Historians still argue whether it was greed, confusion, or divine irony that steered them off course, but within months, the crusade is no longer about Jerusalem. It's about survival and paying bills. The army sacks Zara, a Christian city, shocking Europe. The Pope excommunicates them in fury. Yet they keep going as if pulled by a current too strong to resist. And then, the strangest detour in history, Constantinople. The greatest city of the Christian East, capital of the Byzantine Empire, the very civilization that first begged the West for help back in the First Crusade. Now, the Crusaders are outside its massive walls, not as allies, but as invaders. You can almost feel the tension of betrayal humming through the marble streets. Inside the city, Byzantine politics are a tangle of backstabbing and betrayal. A young prince promises the Crusaders riches if they restore him to the throne. They agree. But promises are slippery things, especially when made by desperate men. When payment doesn't come, tempers ignite. In April 1204, Constantinople burns. You walk through its smoldering ruins, the air heavy with incense and ash. Crusaders plunder churches, melt sacred icons for gold, and desecrate what was once the beating heart of Eastern Christianity. Horses are stabled in Hagia Sophia. Relics, fragments of the true cross, bones of saints, jeweled chalices, are packed up and shipped west as trophies. The city that had stood for nearly 1,000 years falls in 3 days. Quirky historical tidbit. Among the looted treasures, one crusader apparently took home a mechanical golden bird that could sing on command, centuries before such mechanisms were understood in the West. For historians, that artifact symbolizes the theft of knowledge as much as treasure. The Fourth Crusade never even reaches Jerusalem. Instead, they set up a new, Latin empire on Byzantine soil, crowning a Western emperor in a city they destroyed. You stand on the walls of Constantinople and gaze out at the sea, the smoke curling into the sky, wondering how something called a holy war could turn into this carnival of chaos. The Venetian Doge, despite being nearly 90 years old and blind, walks through the conquered city with quiet triumph. Faith may have failed, but business has never looked better. Coins jingle louder than prayers. Historians still argue whether this crusade marked the true end of unity in Christendom, a betrayal so deep that the schism between East and West would never heal. The Orthodox world, betrayed and broken, would remember this as a wound deeper than any Muslim conquest. And maybe they were right. You think of all the idealists who once marched under the cross, the barefoot pilgrims, the knights who believed heaven waited beyond the desert. If they could see this, the gold-laden ships departing from the ruins of Constantinople, maybe they'd understand what the historian Stephen Runciman meant when he called the Fourth Crusade the final act of tragedy. The Crusades were supposed to redeem. Instead, this one corrodes. Yet even as the flames fade, new rumors begin to rise. The Holy Land still beckons. Kings still dream of glory. And in Europe's restless heart, greed and faith keep whispering the same ancient invitation, Deus vult. God wills it. Only now, you can't help but wonder, whose God and whose will? You find yourself standing beneath a bruised sky over the Levant, the once glorious Crusader kingdoms now withering like dried vines. The Fifth, Sixth, and Seventh Crusades follow one another like echoes, smaller, wearier, and increasingly confused about what they're even fighting for. You can almost feel the momentum dying, the great dream dissolving into dust and politics. The Fifth Crusade begins in 1217 with yet another bold promise. Take Egypt, the key to controlling Jerusalem. But ambition and coordination don't often share the same tent. The army, a mix of European nobles and knights, sails for the Nile, where they face a foe far more patient and pragmatic, the Ayyubid successors of Saladin. Under the scorching Egyptian sun, you trudge beside the Crusaders through the swampy banks of the Nile Delta. Their chainmail rusts, their food spoils, and the mosquitoes hum louder than any hymn. Historians still argue whether arrogance or simple bad luck doomed them, but the pattern is painfully clear. The Nile floods unexpectedly, trapping the Crusader army in rising waters near Damietta. Disease follows. Panic follows disease. Surrender follows panic. A quirky historical note. When the Crusaders were forced to retreat, some of their ships sank under the sheer weight of loot stolen from earlier raids. Imagine drowning not because you lost the battle, but because you couldn't let go of the gold. The dream doesn't die easily. In 1229, another unlikely figure steps forward, Emperor Frederick II, the so-called wonder of the world. Fluent in Arabic, skeptical of the church, and excommunicated twice, he leads the Sixth Crusade and manages what armies couldn't. He negotiates Jerusalem back through diplomacy. No siege, no blood, just signatures. It's one of history's strangest victories. Frederick strolls into Jerusalem unopposed, crowns himself king, and walks the empty streets in eerie silence. But he's also a man out of place, a crusader without the church's blessing, a negotiator in an age that worships war. Historians still debate whether his peaceful crusade was genius or blasphemy. You imagine standing beside him as he gazes at the Dome of the Rock, listening to the call to prayer echo over the city walls. For a fleeting moment, the war feels tired, maybe even ashamed of itself. But peace doesn't last. Within decades, the fragile agreements collapse. Jerusalem changes hands again, and the Christians' foothold shrinks until only a few coastal cities remain. By the mid-13th century, all that's left are desperate attempts to rekindle old glories. Enter Louis IX of France, later St. Louis, pious, earnest, and tragically stubborn. The Seventh Crusade begins in 1248, once again targeting Egypt. You follow him through Alexandria's shimmering heat, the banners snapping weakly in the breeze. The pattern repeats: disease, bad timing, and divine silence. At Mansoura, Louis's army is trapped and routed. The king himself is captured, ransomed for an astronomical sum, so much silver it nearly breaks France's treasury. Quirky tidbit: while imprisoned, Louis reportedly impressed his captors with his calm manners and fair dealing, the kind of king who could lose with dignity. But when he finally returns home, he's haunted by failure. Years later, he launches another doomed crusade to North Africa, where he dies of dysentery outside Tunis, his last words murmuring Jerusalem's name. By now, the word crusade itself has lost its halo. It's no longer a sacred quest, but a political slogan, invoked by popes and princes to justify wars anywhere, for anything. As you wander through the crumbling fortresses of Acre and Tyre, wind whispering through broken arches, you feel the fatigue of 2 centuries pressing on your chest. Thousands have died, countless fortunes spent, and the Holy Land is still divided, scarred, and restless. Historians still argue whether the Crusades failed completely or simply evolved, spreading ideas, trade, and cultural exchange even through destruction. Venetian glass ends up in Damascus. Arabic texts find their way to Paris. The irony is delicious and tragic. The wars meant to divide actually intertwined civilizations forever. And as the last crusaders pack their relics and sail home, you can almost hear the land exhale, a sigh of relief from a world finally too tired to keep fighting over the same sacred stones. The Crusades are winding down, but their echoes stretch far beyond the burning cities and fallen knights. You find yourself wandering the Levant in the late 13th century, the coast dotted with the skeletal remains of once proud crusader castles. Acre, the last major stronghold, has fallen in 1291, and with it, Christian control of the Holy Land ends almost entirely. You step lightly over cracked stones and toppled towers, the sea breeze salty, the horizon blurred with heat and history. The age of fervent conquest has cooled into exhaustion. Crusader families return to Europe, diminished, humbled, and sometimes financially ruined. Historians still argue whether the Crusades were truly a failure or if their impact was cultural rather than territorial. Trade routes have shifted, ports like Venice and Genoa dominate commerce, and the East-West exchange of knowledge has accelerated. You can trace mathematics, medicine, and architecture flowing westward alongside merchants and soldiers. Walking through the ruins, you notice the subtle blending of cultures. Some Crusader cities adopted local building styles, Arabic words creep into European maps, and spices long sought after by armies now season feasts back home. Even in defeat, the Crusaders have left an indelible mark on both the Middle East and Europe. Yet the human cost is impossible to ignore. Whole generations were lost to disease, starvation, and battle. The Children's Crusade, a tragic episode that never reached Jerusalem, reminds you of innocence consumed by zeal. Legends say thousands of children set out with hope in their eyes and prayers on their lips, only to vanish, sold into slavery or perishing along treacherous roads. The horror still whispers across the centuries. You wander through Jerusalem once more, now under Muslim control, and feel the layered tension of faith, power, and memory. The stones themselves seem to hold stories: the bloodied victories of 1099, Saladin's mercy in 1187, the diplomatic triumphs of Frederick II. Even though empires rise and fall, the city's spiritual significance endures. Pilgrims of all religions continue to journey here, walking paths once soaked with sweat and sacrifice. Quirky historical fact: some Crusader castles, abandoned for centuries, were later used by Bedouins as stables and granaries. Stones that once defended kingdoms became part of local life, proof that even war's monuments eventually bend to time and survival. And yet, the Crusades' political lessons linger. The West learns both ambition and folly, the East learns caution and unity. Trade, diplomacy, and warfare are forever altered. Empires are wary, and the Church itself is tempered by the failures and excesses of its crusading zeal. You notice that the distant horizon, once imagined as a land flowing with milk, honey, and divine promise, is still calling. Wars may end, treaties may be signed, but faith, greed, and human ambition continue to intertwine like the twisted roots of an ancient tree. As you settle near the ruins, the sun sinks low, casting long shadows across the sand. You realize that the Crusades weren't just battles for land or religion. They were a mirror, reflecting the best and worst of humanity, courage and cruelty, faith and folly, ambition and mercy, all entwined in the same relentless pursuit of something greater than oneself. You sit quietly on the edge of a hill overlooking the Mediterranean, the distant cities of Acre and Tyre faintly visible like ghosts. The last Crusader banners have been lowered, and the Holy Land has returned, in large part, to Muslim control. Yet you feel the echoes, faint but insistent, of 2 centuries of faith, fire, and human ambition reverberating through the stones, the seas, and the winds. This is not just history, it's a story that refuses to be quiet. As you reflect, you see the subtle legacies everywhere. Crusader castles still dominate hilltops, symbols of both European reach and temporary conquest. Venice and Genoa flourish as trade hubs, enriched by the Crusades' commerce. Ideas, art, and knowledge flow westward from the east. Mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and even culinary delights reshaping Europe quietly, almost imperceptibly. The wars that destroyed so much also built bridges, strange and unexpected, between civilizations. Historians still argue whether the Crusades' intellectual and cultural exchange outweighs the violence, but you can see both in stark relief. You think of the countless men, women, and children swept up in these campaigns. The barefoot pilgrims, the knights dreaming of glory, the merchants and opportunists, all of them pawns and players in a drama written by faith, ambition, and fortune. The Children's Crusade remains a haunting reminder of innocence lost, a cautionary tale of zeal misapplied. The brutality of Jerusalem in 1099, the measured mercy of Saladin, the disastrous Fourth Crusade in Constantinople, they all teach the same lesson. Human greed and devotion are deeply intertwined, often indistinguishably so. And yet, there's a quiet poetry in it. Cities endure, ideas survive, and the land itself continues to inspire awe. Pilgrims still tread the same paths, prayers blending with the wind and the call to prayer, the bells of churches, and the whispers of history itself. Even failure leaves its mark, and even defeat can teach what victory cannot. Quirky aside, some of the Crusader castles were later used by Bedouins as homes or stables. Stones that once defended kings now shelter livestock. A reminder that time transforms even the grandest human ambitions into ordinary life. As night falls, you breathe in the scented air, olive trees, sea salt, and warm sand. The horizon softens into a blur, and the stories of war, faith, and folly settle into memory. You feel both small and connected, a witness to the complex dance of history that continues to shape our world. In these final moments, remember that the Crusades were never just battles of sword and shield. They were a mirror held up to human nature, reflecting courage, cruelty, faith, and folly in equal measure. Their ghosts whisper through the centuries, reminding you that even in conflict, there is meaning to be gleaned, lessons to be carried forward, and stories to lull you into quiet reflection. As you lie back and let your body sink into the comfort of your bed, imagine the desert night stretching endlessly above you. The stars twinkle faintly, like candles lit by hands long gone, and the cool night breeze whispers through invisible olive trees. The weight of history feels distant now, softened by the gentle rhythm of your own breathing. Each story, each battle, each moment of triumph or despair has folded into the quiet night, leaving only a faint echo, a memory hovering softly in the air. You feel the sand of Antioch under your feet, the golden stones of Jerusalem warm against your hands, the stone walls of Acre rising silently around you. The voices of knights, priests, merchants, and children mix in a gentle chorus, fading slowly into the hum of time. Even the tragedies, the betrayals, and the bloodshed seem to dissolve in this calm, leaving behind the lessons, the marvels, and the human stories that endure. Breathe in slowly. Feel the centuries of devotion, ambition, and courage settling into your mind as you drift. The Crusades were not merely wars, they were reflections of our endless search for meaning, of the ways we strive, stumble, and sometimes succeed. You are part of this long story now, a quiet witness traveling through time, carrying the weight of their dreams and follies without bearing their exhaustion. The horizon of your imagination softens, the world blurring into a gentle haze of night and sand. The ghosts of history rest alongside you, no longer demanding attention, only company. Let your thoughts float, untethered, as the past exhales softly, and the stories of the Crusades fold into the vast, calm rhythm of the universe. And as your eyes close, feel the peace of a world that has endured, reshaped, and survived, just as you will.